this month I have two people also tackling the same question that I did in the newsletter about how ideas become stories. So this month I have my good pals, Erin Bowman, who's the author of the Taken trilogy and Vengeance Road, out now. I also have Sadie! And also on the chat is Susan Dennard, the newly minted New York Times bestselling author of TRUTHWITCH and the Something Strange and Deadly series. So Munchkin, stay on the ground. So I was just going to start by asking you guys, something I addressed in the newsletter is that I get asked all the time where my ideas come from, and I have never, ever, ever been lucky enough to have one of those, like, lightning bolt ideas that come to me in a dream or when I'm in the shower out for a walk. It's usually some crazy culmination of, like, a lot of my different interests or an idea I've been thinking about for a while that's been slowly cooking and evolving. So I'm wondering if you guys can tackle that question.
Erin, go. All right. You know, it's funny you said that you've never had one that just strikes, you know, like inspiration and a bolt of inspiration. And I think while I have had some stories come to me like that, like Vengeance Road, for instance, all of a sudden just fell into my head. At the same time, I'd wanted to write a Western for years, and it was like my entire life that led me to writing that book. Like, loving that genre as a kid, reading that genre, watching those movies with my father. So while the idea finally just hit, I think a lot of my life experiences, I think that's true for all writers, right? A lot of your passions and a lot of experiences you have growing up ends up channeling into your books too. And I have had some ideas come to me like in a dream, but I write down that little note and then I build on it like you. It builds into something bigger. I've yet to have just the book fall in magically out of nowhere. That would be amazing. What about you, Sue?
It's crazy.
Yeah, same. I mean, I definitely have had like small pieces of inspiration come from dreams or, you know, encounters, but it's usually a lot of other things coming into play to build the idea into something. And yeah, I kind of have decided that the best ideas maybe are the ones that take the most work. Like, I think we tend to think and believe that if it's hard, it must not be right or it's not good, but I actually don't think that's necessarily true anymore. I've realized that the ideas I believe in the most are the ones that I keep going back to even though they've given me agony. So it must mean something.
That's so true. There is sort of this idea that if it doesn't all fall into place at once and click immediately, then there's something inherently flawed with it. When in actuality, stories take a long time to develop and usually involve multiple rounds of revision and re-brainstorming over and over again. So
exactly.
Do you guys have a preferred method of brainstorming? I was talking about how I have a notebook for each and every book I write, and it's usually almost just like stream of consciousness. It's like an interview with the characters. I always start with the characters themselves. But do you guys start with world building? Do you have like a more structured system than my crazy pants method?
I don't. Erin, do you? I mean, I do pretty much the same thing. I mind map a lot.
Wait, what is mind mapping? Explain.
It's like where you just like here, I'm doing it right now. It's
that
like
sounds very fancy.
Where you like bubble ideas and then they lead to new ideas and it connects and branches. And
I do that and didn't know that's what it was called. I'm not
either.
Oh my gosh, I'm obsessed with this new software by the same people who made Scrivener. It's called Scabble. It's only $15 and it's like mind mapping, but it's so easy. I like doing it on my computer because sometimes you can think with your hands and sometimes with your fingers. So yes, same idea.
Yeah, I overlap with you guys in the sense that I always have a dedicated notebook for each idea. Yeah. And that's like once I think it might actually be novel length appropriate. Usually if I have an idea, I write like a one-sentence little thing into my phone. I have like a document on my phone that's just book ideas because that's the quickest way for me to make sure I don't forget it. And then once I think it's something that might be a story, then I give it a dedicated notebook. And I don't know, my brainstorming method changes for every book. I know a lot of writers, not every book comes out the same, right? Every book is different and you have to figure out how to write it, and that, at least for me, has always applied to brainstorming too. But I will say I have noticed that I need to do a lot more brainstorming and outlining up front for when I write historical fiction, as opposed to like sci-fi or action adventure like the Taken trilogy and some of the other books I'm playing with right now. Like those I often just start writing right away, not the whole book. I just start writing because I'm so excited about it and I feel like the freedom to do that. Whereas with historical fiction, I feel like I need to, you were saying world building, Alex, I think I need to understand, since it's set in our actual world and in history, I need to understand the foundation of that before I start, or I get myself in a wall, you know, up against a wall, and then I feel this book is horrible and flawed and ruined and I have to throw it out, which isn't always true, but I just, the more, you know, foundation work I do with those, the better I feel like the drafting comes.
Yeah, you know, I like didn't really think about this, but that's very true. The way I approached The Darkest Minds versus Passenger was very different because you have to do so much research up front, and yeah, I guess with The Darkest Minds, like going back and looking at my original brainstorming notes, the world building is completely different than what I ended up with. So I guess my question for you guys now is, how important is it to have the world building completely set up before you even start drafting, or do you need to be able to kind of play around in the world and kind of test the limits and see if you need to add rules or if some rules actually don't make sense?
I mean, I think that the latter, it's good to plan a lot ahead, but also once you're actually have you know, jumped into the story, you need to have flexibility so the story can go where it needs to go and grow as it needs to grow, and so you can uncover cool, unexpected details. But again, with historical, since all of us have written historical,
yeah, that's true. You've written
really, yeah, we're all confined. Erin and I are even in the same year, right? 1876.
77.
Oh, you're 77, yeah. So it's like almost we've had a lot of, which is fun, overlapping resources, which is really fun. But you're kind of stuck, as you know, like by what actual history was. So I agree too with you, Erin, that you kind of have to do a lot of this foundational research and world building, or just understanding the real world up front, so that then when you write, you don't totally mess it up and throw in something that was just impossible. Have to rewrite it.
With Vengeance Road, I literally like you can't. It was straight historical fiction. I wasn't even like, both of you guys have a little bit of magic in your historical fiction. Like, I was writing straight up just history, and I really wanted to keep, like, that was a big struggle for me though too, because I wanted to keep it that way. There wasn't a magic element where I could bend certain things, but you did, as Sue said, you want to like let the story go where it wants to go. And so I tweaked things. Like, one of my figures was a true historical figure, and there was no indication that he had a home in a certain place, but I like gave him this little residence because it helped the story, you know what I mean? So I think it's less, you have to have rules and set up your rules for your story so that everything makes sense and feels believable. And then if you're going to break them, at least break them in a believable way. And that was the thing. This figure who I gave a secondary house, it was a house that he used while mining, for example, and it was like a temporary residence, so it was really run down. So it all seemed to fit naturally within the world. And I think that's what's key. Like, make your rules and stick to them, and if you have to break them in a way that almost doesn't feel like breaking. It's the most contradictory advice ever, but does that make sense? You guys know what I mean, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Sort of related to this is that I remember, I think, Susan, you said this, perhaps. It was like, Susan has amazing writing resources on her website, susandennard.com. And I think I was reading maybe a blog post that you had written, this was like years ago, about the way to know when to stop doing research for your book and just start writing. And I think what you said was something to the effect of, when you're finding like multiple sources that are basically saying the same things, you know you've kind of like gotten there and you have a good sense of like what that world was like and can use that information. Do you still think that's true, or is it, I know with Passenger I did most of the research up front.
Yeah.
And then now with Wayfarer, because of my writing schedule, I'm doing a lot of the research as I'm writing, which has kind of slowed down the writing. Not in a bad way, just in a different way.
Yeah.
So do you think it's like imperative to do all of the research up front, or just enough to get you going and kind of
I think you have to set a limit, because I also think it can be a really great procrastination technique. you know, oh, I don't know enough about carriages in 1876 yet. That was one of the ones I used back in the day where I was like, oh, I can't write yet. I don't know enough. But I mean, that's not true. And then at some point you do have to, I think, yeah, I probably did say that. That sounds like something I would say. Like once you're rehashing the same things and you really aren't learning anything new that you know is key to the story, then yeah, it's time to write and see. Because you're going to come across things you don't know, where you have to look it up and take a break, and so, but you know.
Yeah, you can always fill in details. I think the way I like to approach it is kind of like if you're writing a fantasy novel, right, where you're making up the whole world, there's certain things you look to figure out first. Like, okay, what are the people like, and where do their resources come from, and how do they interact with those people over the border? Like, that's the same type of stuff you need when you're writing historical fiction, I think. So like for me, it was like, okay, what are all these people doing in Arizona? Oh, gold is big right now? Okay, where are they getting the gold? Who's fighting with who over the gold? What are the racial tensions? Like all of the stuff that when you say why is the character going to do this, it's I think all the why questions of how people are interacting that you need to ask. And then like, yeah, you need to know a little bit about the carriage and the detail of the carriages. But for me, it was more like, okay, the freighting stuff is coming in on the wagons. How long does it take to get goods there? I needed to know the logistics of how the world worked, and then what the wagon actually looked like and what size it was and how much it weighed and how many tons it could carry. Like that you can go back later and put in. Those are the details that I think Sooz is so right. You can be like, well, I'm still researching, so I'm doing work. But yeah, you can like research anything to death. It's like endless wormholes and you'll never end up writing.
Yeah, no, I kind of fell into that trap too with Passenger, just in terms of being like reading all of the privateer accounts. I like really only a small part of that book is set on a ship in 1776, but I must have read like thousands of pages on like holes and just like the rabbit holes that you go down, like being like, this is fascinating. Tell me more about what kind of shoes they wore on the ships. Anyway. I know we talked about that a lot on tour, Susan, how like we both love researching and we both love history, and Erin obviously loves researching and history too. So
I like love-hate it. I have a love-hate relationship.
I know. My least favorite thing is when I like desperately need something to work and click and like it just is not possible based on the history, and I'm like, can I fudge it?
I know.
It never works. Well, I know that we all have different ideas that are like in various stages of kind of cooking, as I like to say. Background and all of that. But have you guys ever had an idea where you've started writing it and it just like has not worked and you've had to completely abandon it? You don't really have any use for it anymore. Like what happens to those stories that you kind of, I don't want to say give up on, but you like recognize that they're not going to work?
I mean,
this happens. I get so many questions about this on Tumblr about like, I don't feel like my story's working. Should I work on something else?
I definitely have like an idea like that I have tackled a few times and completely rewritten a few times, and like I still don't know what to do with it. But I don't want to give up on it, so it's just one of those where it's like, all right, I'm going to set it aside until one day maybe the solution appears, because I think there's something there that inspired me to want to write it, but maybe I didn't have enough, maybe there weren't enough ideas that had culminated. I dove in too soon, but...
Is it almost like a learning book for you in terms of like figuring out like different storytelling elements and kind of trying to
help
yourself with it?
I feel like, because it started off like first person and then I became third person, and then just the whole voice and style evolved and changed, and I started adding different genres even to it. So it's like definitely a learning book. But yeah, I mean, we're in the lucky position of having deadlines, which kind of force us to give up on a project that's not working, in favor of the book that we've already sold.
Yeah.
So, I tend to recommend when people are asking, should I stick with it or not, like, it's hard to say. Try working on something else, and if that does work better, then yeah, you can come back to that other project later. I think we all fall into this trap. There's a psychological term for it, and I'm blanking on it now. I think it's called like the lawyer effect, where lawyers, even though they're miserable at their job, they spent so much money on law school and spent so much time in law school that they won't quit because they're like, no, I put so much into this, I will not give up.
I kind of love that. It's probably pretty true.
And so I feel like that's the way we feel with books, though. We're like, no, I've spent so much time on this stupid book, I will not give up on it, but maybe it should be, and maybe you should just try working on something else and see what happens.
But don't
nothing is
throw it
wasted.
out.
Yeah, don't throw it out.
Don't throw it out. Just put it in a folder and leave it there until who knows. Like maybe all of a sudden something will click. Maybe you'll, I don't know, go through some huge life experience or cross some milestone or go on a trip and all of a sudden something will fall into place and now you're in a place where you can write that book.
Do you guys ever, I always say I pick at the bones of failed projects. I'll lift lines from it or characters or an idea.
Oh yeah, totally. Actually, I'm writing a short story right now, and the idea for that came from this failed project of mine.
That's
cool.
Cool.
One little spark of a scene came. I'm like, you know what? I might just take that scene from that old book that's not working and put it into this short story. Why not? So,
there you go.
I think going back to what some of the readers and writers were asking you, Alex, though, about do you ever feel like your project's just not working and failing, and what do you do? I think I want to go back to that for a second because I think what Sue said is right. Sometimes you think it's failing because you either just hit a little wall and you want to give up on it because fixing it is harder than just, the whole thing we just said about when the words are flowing and everything's just coming out, you feel like the book is right, and when it becomes a struggle, you feel like it's wrong and maybe it's not the right project.
Right.
So I think it's very easy to turn your back on something that actually isn't broken or shouldn't be a failed project. So I think it's good to try something new for a little bit, and if you keep thinking about that story that you think might be the failure, it's probably not the failure, and keep trying it, or go back a couple chapters and see if you maybe made a wrong turn. Try to I don't know. I just think, I know I've done that before, where all of a sudden the book gets really hard and I'm like, okay, this isn't the book I should be writing then.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's really hard to know when it is a project you need to set aside and come back to in a couple years, or if it's just you need to power through or figure out where you went wrong, or just give it a little bit more elbow grease. Because, they don't all come out nicely. Most of them don't come out nicely.
I know. Most of them are not cute when they come out. I feel like lately, within the past couple years, less so now that I've kind of gotten over this mental hurdle a little bit, and I have a little bit, I'm lucky enough to have some freedom in what I can choose to work on and at what pace, but I always used to say that because I worked in marketing and worked in publishing, I would always kind of get in my own way of trying to figure out what I actually wanted to work on, because I was very hung up on what's the most marketable, what's going to have the broadest appeal, what will international publishers think of this? Does this have the potential to be optioned for film? And I don't think that's actually the way you should go about this at all. The project that I think I'm going to work on after Wayfarer is partially in a genre that people say is dead, or they're tired of it, and I'm sort of going back to what I did with The Darkest Minds, where I'm really kind of just writing the book for myself as a palate cleanser, and we'll see what happens with it. But do you guys ever struggle with that feeling of wanting to hit something that's marketable, but also overlapping with what your actual interests are? Are you very focused on listening to the market at all, or is it just so, I feel like it's so hard to keep up with the market, and a bunch of different things are working right now, so it's sort of
yeah.
Well,
always there is.
I'll say this, nobody was all that excited about Westerns. Everyone was like, Westerns are weird. And then when my book came out, there were several other Westerns all within a few months of each other. And it still is a hard sell. It's not a book that Vengeance Road has always been hard to appeal over in foreign markets, because U.S. history and cowboys in Arizona is not as appealing to people outside of the U.S., and it's not even appealing to a lot of people in the U.S. I think it's a niche group that loves Westerns. But at the end of the day, I just was in love with that story and wanted to tell it, and I do not regret telling it at all because it was so much fun to work on. But even with it being so much fun, I had that fear in the back of my head of oh boy, I'm writing a Western. See how this goes. But you can't. What you said, Alex, about writing for yourself, at the end of the day, you're the one that's going to have to revise it so many times that you're sick of looking at it, and you're going to read it
revise it till your eyes are like, you're weeping blood, basically.
You're like bleeding because you never want to read the book again. Like, you are stuck with working on the book that many times, so you might as well write something that you love, whether it's a genre that no one cares about, whether it's a genre that's dead, whether it's the genre that's like huge right now, so by the time you publish yours, it's going to be over. Like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think the market moves so much that what you write now could come back in 5 years. I have a friend who wrote a sweet contemporary, and when she was trying to sell it a few years ago, nobody wanted that, and now it's maybe something that will actually sell. And so it's like you never know, and why not build up? You've got them in your back pocket then. I think it's hard for us because once you're contracted, you want to sell, you want to make money, you want to continue to do this as your career, and so you are worried about what's going to actually sell now so that I can continue to eat.
I think it's also important to recognize that a lot of trends are kind of artificially created, in the sense that, like, once something is identified as working, like the Hunger Games, then publishers will literally say to editors, like, we want a book like the Hunger Games, or we want, like, buy a couple projects like this, and then we can kind of catapult off what the project that's working, in this case the Hunger Games, make it work. It's not necessarily like a huge demand up front, but it's sort of stimulated by publishing, and sometimes those trends don't really, like, pan out, I guess. They
steampunk. I really think they thought steampunk was going to be one, NYA, and it did not.
It didn't.
I got lucky, I guess, because I sold my series, but, like, then nobody read it, so it didn't matter. I mean, so it is what it is. But maybe one day it actually will break out, and hey,
it'll be there
for you. Yes, exactly. So yeah.
Oh, this was another question I was going to ask you guys, because I think a lot of people wonder about this. And jumping off of that, do you guys, like, brainstorm for the entire series, or do you just brainstorm for the first book? Or is it sort of like you have, like, vague details of what might happen or where the story will go past book one?
To that one. Option C.
Option C. Option crazy pants.
I mean, it's hard, too, because, again, you never know if you're going to sell all of the books, and so you don't want to, as you know, you don't want to put in too much work and then have it not work out. On the other hand, if you don't plan, you end up like me, where you're like, I don't know what comes next, and that's problematic too. But I do tend to just vaguely have a general sense of where the story might go, and then hope for the best.
Me too. I usually have. I've always said that when I draft, I'm like a headlights writer, which, Sooz, I know we've used this term before, that you can see as far as the headlights of your car, and a couple major milestones along the way, but when you're writing, you're only going as far as your headlights. I like kind of use the same approach when I'm planning out a series. So I know the details of what's literally right before me, but I know, like, the huge turning points and the huge milestones, like the big things that change the game for everyone involved. I usually have those scribbled down in a notebook somewhere, so I kind of know where things are going. And the Taken trilogy was like that. Like, the ending I envisioned when I started writing that series was the ending I ended up with, which is
nice, yeah,
amazing in a way. And a lot of the details in between ended up changing from what I envisioned, but I had, like, this rough roadmap, and that's kind of what I followed. And then I let the characters, wander and diverge a little bit along the way. There was a lot of this, as I explained.
A lot of waving in and out. I like it.
A lot of that.
Is the conventional wisdom still to write the first book like it's going to be a standalone? I remember when I was first starting out, that was the advice that, like, every agent gave, was that in, like, your query letter, it needed to say, like, must be able to stand alone. Like, the actual language was something to the effect of, like, this is written with a trilogy in mind, but this book could stand alone. And I
totally had that in my query letter.
Me too. I don't know, because I don't know what it's like to be an aspiring writer right now, and I don't know exactly what agents are looking for and what a publisher thinks when they're looking at a book from a debut author. But I would say at least now, where I am in my career now, I'm playing with an idea that I see as a duology right now, and it is a duology. Like there's two different feel. There's a feel to book one and there's a feel to book two, and they're their own separate things. And so for me, I'm willing to like fall on my own sword with that series of saying like, this will be a 2-book project or it won't happen. And when I say won't happen, then it'll be like maybe I'll step back and think if I can, you know, make it be one or make it in a different format. But I'm at a different place right now. I really don't know if you're aspiring, like I don't know what the recommendation is.
I know, and I feel like, oh man, it's whenever anyone asks me for querying advice, I'm like, I haven't done it.
It's so long, I know.
Yeah, it's been forever. I know it feels like it's harder right now just because there are so many more people writing than there were even like 5 years ago. Just
I think my advice would be that like no matter what, it's like basic storytelling advice of like the book needs to be a self-contained satisfying story. Like you can end on a cliffhanger that hooks to something else, but like you should still have resolved the main conflict that begins. Otherwise that's just, I don't know, I get super frustrated if I read a book where like the whole thing's leading towards the resolution and you don't get the resolution in that book. That always drives me crazy. Like there needs to be, one thing has to be solved before you move on to the next dilemma.
I agree.
Oh, I'm sorry, Susan.
No, go ahead. I was just saying, I think so too.
Oh, I was gonna ask. So, is there? For me, it's character, but also like sort of a general sense of the theme. But is there like one thing you guys always have to identify before you can actually really dive in and start writing a book? Like, what is the crucial element that sort of like is the alchemy that makes the books ready to go? Like, I guess the easier way of asking that crazy question was.
No, I get it.
Like, when does the book feel ready to actually start writing it versus stopping brainstorming?
For me, I think it's about the voice. Like, I can't nail that voice. I just keep petering out. And sometimes getting the voice is a matter of understanding where the character's arc is going, or it's a matter of knowing the theme, or even just figuring out the main conflict. And then sort of reverse engineering the voice to fit that, if that makes sense. But if I don't have a voice, like, and it may take a while, like 100 pages to figure it out, and then I tend to rewrite my beginnings pretty heavily. But I don't know. Every book has been a different beast, I have to say.
Mine have all been a little different too, but I think voice, as you said, Sooz, is also very big for me. And so usually a good telling sign for me is when I'm in my notebook, you know, I'm brainstorming, I'm plotting still, I'm thinking things out, and like once I start hearing the characters in my head, like once I'm like playing dialogue and banter between people, like, and I can literally hear and see things, that usually means I'm ready to move over to the computer and start getting it down.
Yeah, I would say it's important too to realize that voice and character are two different things, but they're connected, or character development, I mean, are two different things, but they're very much connected because the character development and who the character is affects the voice and vice versa. But they are sort of, when you're talking about actual writing, they are kind of two different things.
Yes.
Or do you agree or disagree with that?
No, I totally agree. I know, like, for me with Windwitch, which anyone who's a reader of mine knows how much I've struggled with that book. For me, it's been a matter of, like, I just couldn't figure out what Merrick's voice would be, given everything he went through in the first book, and it took finally reverse engineering, figuring out what his growth was going to be, and then going backwards to figure out what that starting point would be, to then figure out how he would express himself, which is his voice. And whoa. Lots of puzzle pieces, but it does, yeah, like once you have the voice, then I can actually, I get it, and I can write them.
Yeah. What about you, Erin? What do you think?
I'm trying to, like, think
Some
about...
of the stuff is very intuitive, and it comes, I think, from reading and kind of just writing, and some of it, that's why it's sometimes very hard to, like, put into words.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, for me, I think this goes back to like when I know it's time for me to start writing, because at least of the books I have had published, those characters, their voices came to me very clearly early on. So for me, unlike Sooz, I've been, again, with the books that are published, I've been lucky in the sense that I had their voice in my head first. And so then, while I wrote the book and I saw how that character was going to be challenged and grow based on their interactions with others, other characters and the world that they're put in, sometimes that voice changed, but I feel like for me, it's always more in like their actions and internal thoughts. That's how I end up showing their growth by the end. I don't know. I think this is something where maybe I don't even know how I do it, and maybe I don't want to pick it apart because maybe that'll make me all the more neurotic when I'm drafting. I don't know.
I know. I think sort of in line with what we were saying before about like not over researching. I think it's very easy to kind of overthink the mechanics of writing like a little bit. Like you obviously don't want to just like word vomit, but I think sometimes you can get like hung up on like am I doing this right? Like am I outlining it right? Is this the right like flow of the story? And sometimes you just kind of have to get the words out and see.
Oh yeah, definitely. I agree with that for sure. I do think it's good to like articulate ideas sometimes if you're stuck like in the revising stage of things where you do want to push your writing maybe and take it up, make it what you intended it to be all along. But yeah, like it's so easy to just either again procrastinate. Oh, I don't know enough about writing yet to write lies, or to say like, oh, I don't understand these terms they're using. What's character development? That doesn't mean you can't write either. You can figure that stuff out as you go.
Exactly. So I think like some of the most important brainstorming that you do is actually not at the beginning of the story, although that is very important, but when you are stuck, like when you hit writer's block. And we kind of were talking about this a little bit, where I feel like writer's block is usually a sign of something in the story is not working, or like that you've somehow become like a little bit bored with it, and you either aren't facing what's not working, or you're kind of like you just don't feel that much excitement for it. So in that case, like how would you guys kind of brainstorm? Would you stop and brainstorm, or would you take a break, or like what are your tactics when it comes to kind of like tackling this big thing I just said?
Well, I think it depends because you mentioned two things. Am I okay, Sooz? Were you about to say something?
No, I was saying your name. Go.
Oh. You were like, Erin, please.
I was all over it.
Knowledge.
So there's two things here. You're saying like when you lose like your passion or interest in the story, or when you're just plain stuck, and sometimes those overlap. But when I'll answer this succinctly and then let Sooz expand if she agrees at all. So when I'm stuck, like literally just stuck, like I don't know what's happening next or something feels wrong, I always go back and I look at motivations, like why are characters doing what they're doing, and why are the secondary characters helping the main character or butting heads with the main character, like, all those interactions. So I look at motivations, because usually what happens is I've had my character like make a wrong turn or do something that doesn't feel quite right for them. So I like to go back and inspect what I've done. And then if I've lost like passion for the project, or I'm just like not into it or excited about it, then I usually either, take a break because maybe I'm just burnt out. But the other thing I like to do is like write down why I was originally excited about the project, or write down what I'm excited to write in the scenes to come. Like maybe I haven't reached the big climax action scene yet or something. Like I just literally write down why I can't wait to write that scene in my notebook, and sometimes that will like, I don't know, rekindle some of the love for your project.
It's the cookie method, which now
yeah, it's Sooz's cookie method. Sooz has all these awesome like coined terms for things.
I mean, cookies, I don't know. It's not very technical. It works.
Yeah, but I love it. Maybe you should explain it quickly, Sooz.
Well, it's what you said. It's what Erin said about how finding what you love in the project and reminding yourself of that. I believe that every scene should have a cookie, meaning that if there's not something in the scene that excites you to write it, then don't write that scene. Or else find a cookie, add a cookie, figure out a way to make yourself love the scene so that you're excited to write it. But that doesn't always work. I mean, as you said, sometimes you're just really burnt out on a project and you really do just need like a week or two away, or longer if you have the luxury of it. And And I don't know, other times I think, like, I sometimes you just have to, like, give up on whatever you were planning, too. Maybe what you thought you were going to do, maybe some of the cookies you'd intended to have really just aren't going to work. That's usually the hardest for me to let go of, is like, oh, I had all these awesome ideas, I was so excited to write them, and now I just don't think they're going to work. Oh, well, I'll save them for another project.
I think, Suze, you mentioned too earlier, you mentioned like talking things out, I think you said. Like,
yeah, that helps a
I mean,
lot.
all three of us have done that. Like when we get really stuck, sometimes all you need to do is just like literally talk it out, word vomit on a friend or critique partner and be like, here's where I was thinking of going. And half the time you'll realize where you were wrong as you talk it out. Or one of them will be like, wait a minute, why don't you just do X?
Yeah, and you're like, oh, so obvious, I didn't see it.
Oh, we get so close to our projects. I don't think, like, no one is immune to that. We all become so invested in what we're writing that, like, you can't step back and see it objectively. So having writer friends and critique partners that you can count on, big help.
Confession, when we were on tour, Alex, I overheard a reader saying her theories for TRUTHWITCH, like, I think this is going to happen next. And I was like, no way, honey, that's ridiculous. And then like 3 days later, I was like, no, it's brilliant. Oh my gosh, actually, might steal that idea, reader. Thank you. You saw something I didn't. I never would have gone in that direction. Thank you for your crazy off-the-wall idea. If only I knew her name, I would so acknowledge her, but I didn't even like see. It was like on the other side of a shelf. I don't even know who the person was.
So your acknowledgments for the book will just have to be like,
that person on the other side of the shelf. You win.
Thanks.
Maybe she'll like recognize it when she reads it.
Maybe that'd be amazing.
She'll be like, I'm a prophet.
I saw it coming. I knew it. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. Okay. So you guys have been super generous with your time, but I'm wondering if you can answer one more question, which is, what are you guys brainstorming right now?
The never-ending hell that is Windwitch. I say that lovingly. The good thing is that I still love this book.
You guys don't understand. Like when Susan and I were together at Comic-Con, she was working on TRUTHWITCH. You have been working on this book for so long. It's
it's been almost a year and a half since I started working on this book. This is the longest I have ever spent on one project exclusively. Like, usually I'm working on other things at the same time if it takes me this long. No.
Well, to be fair, you finished a draft of
I did finish a draft. It was just really bad. So I threw it out and started over. And this is like the 12th time I've started over. So yes, I'm working on that, although now it is finally going really well.
Yay!
Yay! So, it took figuring out Merrick's arc, I guess. But, yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Cool.
And I'm working on Retribution Rails, which is a companion novel for Vengeance Road. And I'm like slogging my way through the first draft. I have not had to start over as many times as Susan, nor have I been working on it as long as Susan has been working on Windwitch, but this goes back to what we were saying earlier of how this book is not coming out as cleanly and gloriously as Vengeance Road did. Like, I mean, I had to work at Vengeance Road. I had to revise it. I had, the struggles that a lot of writers do, but the first draft of that book kind of flew out of me, and I am, like, literally slogging my way through this draft of the companion. That doesn't mean it's broken or awful. It just means it's coming out messy, and it's a lot of effort. But I'm getting there, and I'm having... It's a hard-won victory,
as I always say.
You what?
It's a hard-won victory. You're like having to pin it to the mat, basically.
I am. Yes. It is an uphill battle, and I will get there, and then I will make it all polished and shiny in revision. Right now, I'm struggling my way through the draft, and so there's been lots of brainstorming, lots of stepping back and saying, why is the character doing this? What are they trying to accomplish? I feel like I'm doing that almost every single, chapter, whereas, miraculously, I just knew where things were going in Vengeance Road. I don't know. I got lucky.
Yeah, I mean, it's so crazy how, like, you brainstorm throughout the entire process of writing a book. You brainstorm at the beginning, you brainstorm while you're writing, and even when you get an editorial letter, you get feedback from a critique partner. Yeah. You have to go back and brainstorm again. So it's, like, a great skill to learn to love and to, like, develop your own method of having fun with it and just kind of figure out what works for your particular brain, your thought process, and your book. So I just wanted to thank Susan and Erin again for joining me this month to talk about brainstorming.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Shoot us any questions that you guys might have. Susan, you are at St. Dennard on Twitter. Erin, you are at, what are you? You're at Erin
underscore. Yeah, Erin underscore Bowman.
They're also both on Instagram. Erin is at Hey Erin, and Susan, you are at
St. Dennard, I think. So it's pretty easy.
Erin, you always throw me for a loop, basically.
I know. I'm sorry. It changes. I had Instagram for like years, like before I was even doing writing things. So that's like my weird handle.
I know. I love it though. 10 out of 10 would recommend. Anyway, have a great day, guys. Thanks
everyone.
for watching.
Bye.
Bye.